Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Open Protocol meeting. Obviously, this is the first time we're doing it in this Discord channel, but most of the conversation around Stellar development has moved to Discord, and so it makes sense to kind of put it all in one place. Most of the Jump Cannon work, in fact, all of it is really being done in the open here on the Jump Cannon channel and on the Jump Cannon dev channel. So anyone who's interested in seeing us work to bring smart contracts to Stellar can, join in that discussion. So today, these meetings, these protocol meetings, are here to discuss and plan for actual changes to the Stellar protocol. And we are focused on Project Jump Cannon at this point and on which will bring smart contracts to Stellar. And we're talking here about the protocol changes that are necessary in order to accommodate it. To tackle Jump Cannon, we actually decided to break up the suggested protocol changes into a suite of core advancement proposals. And at this point, there are actually 4 different caps that are linked to, 3 of which are linked to in the meeting invite, one that just came in under the wire, but it's cap 49. So those caps are cap 46, the WebAssembly smart contract runtime environment, which is what we discussed last meeting. And it's basically a building block that establishes a vocabulary that we can use to talk about WASM-based smart contract environments. 47, the smart contract lifecycle, defines the structure of smart contracts on Stellar and specifies how users can create, update, and remove them. Then cap 48 and cap 49, I think, are 2 approaches to deal with smart contract asset interoperability. And so this meeting is being is like anyone can sort of watch it now. I believe David has a SDF role. But we are also archiving this and posting it on YouTube so that people who can't be in the Discord channel who want to watch the protocol meeting can watch it later. So with that said, we're talking about smart contracts. I believe that the first set of issues that is probably worth talking about relate to your caps, John, cap 48 and cap 49, deal with interoperability. So I feel like there's some questions that are open that we might want to. It's probably useful to talk about now, but John, do you want to sort of give an overview of where we are with those 2 caps, and then we can take it from there?
Sorry, first time doing like a video call on Discord. I'm still getting a little oriented. Let me pull up the relevant documents. Give me one moment. And then I will give a little intro. Okay, I'm ready. Sorry about that. So basically, these 2 proposals, they relate to just one very simple question, or simple sounding question, which is, yes, exactly, with some air quotes on that, which is we have some classic assets, some of which have substantial value sitting beneath them. And we'd like to be able to use those immediately as soon as we deploy Jump Cannon smart contracts on the public network and the kind of framework here is like, well, ideally we can use them without anybody doing anything. They just kind of work like magic. So there's a couple of things that go into that. One thing we'd like is for them to be pretty fast. Tokens are kind of like the framework on which blockchain lives. So that should be really efficient in order to make the whole thing efficient. The second thing is, like, there's no reason to think that anchors are going to instantly deploy new software to support interoperability between their existing assets, like classic assets and smart contracts. And so ideally, it just kind of, we do it for them in some sense. Everybody just gets it for free, basically. And there's one other requirement, which I'm now not remembering. Oh yeah, and the third one is a security kind of situation, which is that, like, when I sign for a Stellar account at medium threshold, I have like complete control over all of that account's balances. Meaning, like, I might be saying that I'd like to make a $5 payment, but if I have $1 million in my account and I signed for a smart contract to control my account at medium threshold, it could just make it $1 million payment. Ideally, we should make it so that that situation is completely impossible. You can't just sign for the account to make payments, basically. And so these 2 caps, 48 and 49, are 2 different perspectives on this problem. Cap 48 is kind of like, what if I did the thing that was the most frictionless possible? But if you do that, you inherit a bunch of weird stuff left over from like the fact that Stellar assets are not really quite exactly like ERC20 assets or whatever other Ethereum standard you'd like. I'm really focused on ERC20 just because I'm familiar with it and it's classic and old, but like there are other standards that could be relevant here. But I'm going to keep saying ERC20, and you should just interpret that to be whatever standard you like. Cap 49, on the other hand, is more like, what if we introduce a little bit of friction, but we make it so that these things really, really, really look like ERC20 assets, and avoid any of these like weird questions like, oh, like what should that do? There's no more ambiguity. So that's kind of my pitch for these two proposals.
So ultimately, is it about choosing one path or the other? Is this like a choice between 48 and 49 that is something that we need to contemplate and make, or are they work together?
Or, given that Cap 49 was just like dumped this morning on the repo, maybe you can give us like a high level overview and like what are the differences between Cap 49 and Cap 48?
Yes, and to answer Justin's question, it is an either or, but not like an either or and no other options exist. It's like these are two good options, and there could be other good options that I haven't thought of, but I have thought of a lot of options, and these two definitely stand out as like probably the best given our requirements. So it's like either 48 or 49 or something that none of us have thought of yet. To go over what Tomer was talking about in terms of 49, because I did kind of just drop it on you guys at like 11 o'clock my time this morning. Basically, I went over the issues in Cap 48, which are listed in the design rationale. There's 4/5 of them, depending on how you think of it. And I went through and kind of designed a system that solves them. So what is the functionality difference before I go over how the issues are different or work out differently? So in Cap 48, basically the machinery is like the asset adapter contract that like everybody gets for free actually goes around and controls the Stellar trust line. So, like when you use the ERC20 function transfer, it actually goes and uses the payment operation to send a payment from this trust line to that trust line, or from this account to that account if it's native. Whereas in Cap 49, that never happens. The only time the contract will ever use your trust line is when you call these two functions wrap and unwrap, or like if you're used to WETH, you would call them as deposit and withdraw. But this was confusing to Nico, so I'm sticking with wrap and unwrap, and we can choose whatever names we like later. But I think nobody will be confused by the terms wrap and unwrap. And basically, like what the wrap function does is it effectively takes some stuff from your trust line, puts it in some new type of ledger entry for the smart contract, which I'm going to call a wrappable balance. Name stinks, whatever, we can change it. And then it basically mints the corresponding ERC20. And then all the other ERC20 transactions operate on this, ERC20 type balance that's just like a new thing completely. And the opposite thing, unwrap, just does all of that in reverse. And so like the ERC20 stuff is like completely working on new ledger entries. It doesn't use any of the old machinery at all. Only the wrap and unwrap functions actually interact with the old machinery. And then to make all this stuff work, you now have to add a few compliance functions. Like you have to add auth and clawback to the ERC20 side of it. But that's like super simple machinery that it's super easy to build. I looked at how people have implemented it. I was actually looking at the USDC contracts to see how they implemented the auth, and it's like exactly as simple as I was thinking we would do. So that was kind of a perfect fit in that sense. In terms of how this solves the problems, actually, before I continue, anybody want to stop me and ask some question? Otherwise, I'll just go over how this solves the issues that I see.
Just for me to understand, there's still this like canonical one-to-one mapping between an asset and a wrapped asset.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a native implementation. You do the same kind of thing where you say hey, give me the contract ID for this asset. and this contract ID is some kind of like native thing. There's no logging behind it. It just runs. It has some interface that we prescribe. And there's exactly one of them for every asset that you could ever make. That's it. And they can store data, and I'm not really talking about how the data is being stored in the cap because we don't know what the fee model is yet. So like there will be some fee model. I don't know who's paying for it. I don't particularly care at this time, and whatever we decide later should just retrofit onto it. That's that basically. Any other questions before I go on? Okay. So why do I like the 49 version better than the 48 version? So I'm just going to go like over the issues I notice. So the first thing is like it's not labeled as an issue in Cap 48, but it is one, which is like ideally you should be able to use a Stellar ERC20, like an ERC20 wrapping a Stellar Classic asset, however that interface works. Ideally, you should be able to use it exactly the same way you would use an ERC20. That's not even possible in Cap 48, even ignoring some of the other weird quirks that like we'd have to agree on some design that makes sense, some implementation that makes sense. Because just when you initialize a contract, like let's say you have a liquidity pool contract and you have like a factory for it that takes 2 assets, which are going to be the 2 assets that you have reserves for. Well, you'd have to actually check like, hey, is one of these assets and like a Stellar Classic asset, even if it has an ERC20 interface, because you would still need to create the trust lines for it. That's a bummer, but at least it only happens one time in initialization. That doesn't happen in Cap 49. You don't need to create the trust lines. The contract just does all the magic, and we don't need to be backwards compatible because it's all new machinery. However the fee model works, I don't know. Then the next thing is like, what is the issuer balance? Like if I take the Cap 48 version and I ask the contract like, hey, like balance of the asset issuer, what should I return? Should I return 0? Should I return int64 max? Should I return uint256 max? I mean, like, I have no idea what number to return. There is no sensible answer. The balance of the issuer is infinite, and also 0.
I think it's 0.
Sorry,
I think 0. I think 0 is a good answer for that question.
but like you can make a payment from the issuer in account, so surely its balance isn't 0.
Sure, it can mint, right? But it doesn't like it's the balance of like the currently minted, like the current circulating supply.
I don't know, man. It's not compelling to me, at all. Because like in this context, like the function transfer for what like the function transfer when called on the issuer actually has to mint, which is not how an ERC20 normally works. And since it like if I can call transfer, I should have enough balance to make that transfer. E.g., if the function transfer 100 would succeed, then I must have a balance of greater than 100.
I mean, should we be rethinking how trust lines work in the legacy model? Like, I think it might have been a design mistake that like payment is how you create assets. Like I know, like obviously a lot of people expect that now, but like maybe that's something that we should reconsider. That like actually an issuer can have a balance.
I totally agree that I would love to change that, but it would be a lot of work that I don't want to do in this context, time-wise, when like we could just fix the interface on the ERC20 side of it so that this doesn't happen anymore. And that's that. If you want the same behavior, use smart contracts. That's what Cap 49 proposes. This problem doesn't exist in Cap 49. The reason it doesn't exist in Cap 49 is because the issuer now can hold a real balance, and transfer doesn't mint anymore, because it's all operating on these wrapped up tokens. Tomer's making a lot of faces, so I feel like he's doubtful about my argument here.
No, I'm not doubtful about your argument. I understand why. Like, I think there's an elegance to Cap 49, which is like a better separation between classic and smart. But we are putting a lot of burden on downstream systems and the user to actually like to wrap and unwrap tokens and like present some sort of like a unified view of the universe. that like across these boundaries.
I agree about the unified view of the universe. I don't really agree about the burden of wrapping and unwrapping. There's a section about that, but obviously I dropped this on you guys like 2 hours ago, so I don't assume you've all read it. But basically my argument is like, well, hey, you have to go and work through this whole allowances thing anyway. And if you have to go and do that, you can wrap up your assets when you're doing that at the same time. There's nothing stopping you from doing them at the exact same time. So like, since your wallet is going to guide you through the allowances anyway, it might as well guide you through the wrapping too. That's kind of my argument. That might not apply in the context of like the EIP 2612. Is that the one where you have the permit function? I have to go and look at how that would work, but I assume we could do a similar thing for the wrapping anyway. So probably it would still be fine. Okay. Any questions before I do another one? Am I actually being helpful here? Should I stop?
You're being very helpful, John.
Okay.
I'd love to hear Nico's take. I know he's been having some technical challenges.
Can anybody hear? Okay.
John, can you talk a bit about about the various authorization models, auth required, auth revocable, auth fallbackable, and how they would relate to both Cap 48 and Cap 49?
Yeah, definitely. So in Cap 48, everything kind of just works the way it used to. There's no magic to it at all. The only catch is that like you can't do the auth stuff from smart. We could make it so that you could, but there's like a wide variety of reasons why you should not be able to. And that might be a problem. But in Cap 49, the auth stuff works a little differently. But it works differently in a like favorably good way. Everything is simpler. And we can actually fix some things that were broken, or not broken perhaps, but less than ideal in Classic. So the first thing that's better is like in Classic, there are 3 authorization states. You can be unauthorized, authorized to maintain liabilities, or authorized. In Cap 49, all of that still exists in Classic, but in Smart, there's only 2. You're either authorized or you're unauthorized, because there are no liabilities. So authorized to maintain liabilities is the same as unauthorized. So we don't even need to represent it at all. Glorious. The next thing is like we had to do this like Trustline clawback, Trustline flag clawback enabled, something like that. I can't even remember the name of it anymore. To preserve backwards compatibility with Trustlines that like you didn't believe that they would ever be clawbackable. But since clawback already exists before Smart, anything that anybody ever builds on Smart should be aware of the fact that clawback is a possibility. So we don't need that flag either. Sweet. So now we solved 2 problems already. And so now basically the way that auth works is it's just like a single bit on your account. Not on your account, on your like stored in the contract data, I guess, stored in this like wrappable balance entry type of thing. And all it does is it says whether you're allowed to use the contract or not. And it's more, I'm like representing it more in the like completely not allowed to use the contract sense than just what like Stellar Classic would allow. For example, if your account is not authorized on the contract, then you can't even use transfer from to transfer from 2 other people. You can't even be, you can never be the sender basically on this account. And that, I didn't think of that originally, but that is what is implemented in that USDC contract that I was looking at. And that approach makes a lot of sense to me. If I'm not authorized to use it for my own balances, I probably shouldn't be authorized to use it for anybody else's balances either. Sounds dangerous. So that's the only real difference. But basically like auth revocable, clawback, all of that stuff that can happen on the smart contract side of it, it's just determined by whatever the issuer flags. If the issuer flags are currently revocable, you're revocable. If it's currently clawbackable, you're clawbackable. That's it. No other magic to it. So it's a much simpler implementation than exists on Classic, basically. Does that kind of answer your question?
I definitely have some other questions. Obviously, wrapping you can only do from like a classic stellar asset to a smart asset. You won't be able to go the other way around, right? So we're essentially saying that like there will be like a new universe of like payments, for example, only for smart contract assets that are completely in jump canon. Like you won't be able to interoperate from the classic protocol.
I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're asking me. Are you saying that there will be are you saying that basically like when somebody wants to use a classic asset, it ends up being only usable in smart until they send it back? Or are you saying that this is kind of a model where people will be using, like, will be making like ERC20 type assets on smart?
I'm saying let's say I'm issuing a new asset on the jump canon side. Doesn't relate at all to these wrapped assets or to any adapter whatsoever. It's just like my own, Tomer coin. Tomer coin will not be accessible from the classic protocol in any way. Like I wouldn't be able to use like a classic payment operation on this coin.
I mean, we should, obviously we can't prevent that, but we should discourage it, right? Like it would be a bummer if, at some point we want to have like really cheap payments and trades, right? And so to the greatest extent possible, we want to encourage people to use assets that can participate in, things like SpeedX, right?
I mean, I suppose in this context, like if you wanted something that was, that could be converted to a classic asset, what you would probably just do is actually make it a classic asset and use the wrapper.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Basically, like it will be a bump. Of course, it's true. We will people can implement their own assets, but to the greatest extent possible, we hope that our classic assets will actually serve the needs of kind of 90% of the kinds of assets people want to issue. What one would hope. Right. Otherwise,
yes,
there's
but
no hope.
But if I want Tomer coin to have features that are missing from the current stellar protocol, then I have no other choice, right? So I think regardless of what we do, we need to acknowledge that we're basically going into a world in which there are two classes of assets that are interoperable between these two runtimes, and assets that are only in jump canon and like do not interoperate.
And it sounds like we're also saying that classic assets that already exist, we wouldn't be able to add in, like if you any of those features, Toma, that you want to add to Toma coin, if USDC wanted to add those same features, they wouldn't be able to do that because it's a classic asset. Is that right?
But if they're compelling features, they might migrate back into the native protocol.
I wouldn't actually rely on us building any new features on the old protocol. I think that's yeah. John is smiling. That's all I needed.
If that's the case, then like we're actually, by doing this, we're not really planning a way to bring new features to existing classic assets. So is there going to be this slow over time movement of assets that just stop using classic, and then we lose the ability to have assets use SpeedX and things like that?
To be honest, I think that Tomer coin is a bit of an edge case. Like if we look at like it's not like assets on Stellar actually have very trivial features missing from them. Like we do have a good coverage of like asset features. So I'm not offended by the idea of like issuing them still on the classic side and wrapping them. I'd like to find a way from the user experience to make it the wrapping part less visible and not have like multiple balances for like the same asset. But we can figure that out later because the ETH WETH experience is not, when you're crypto native, it makes sense. When you're like, just a rando trying to make their first steps in DeFi, it's not like the best experience in the world.
Yeah, I totally acknowledge that. One thing that is kind of missing from the wrapped contract proposal that I wrote, which I did think about this morning, was whether there should be mint and burn operations on the smart side. If there were mint and burn operations on the smart side, it would be possible to effectively issue a classic asset and then always work on the smart side. And so like your users could unwrap them and then use them on classic and rewrap them if we wanted to preserve that interoperability. But like in practice, everything would happen on smart and people would never really be doing the wrapping and unwrapping unless they want to go back to classic. And so that in that world, you avoid the wrapping step. Like imagine if like you have an anchor flow that instead of issuing you the classic asset, then you have to wrap it up and send it to smart. You just like, they ask you like, hey, like, do you want this to be smart or classic? And if you want it to be smart, they just issue it on the smart side. And then you don't have to do the wrapping. Or we could even do that by make that the default at some point. That might make the UX better for some cases, which maybe would be a lot of cases, actually. I don't know. What do you think about that, Tomer/Lee?
It's Yeah, like it complicates things for the issuer, and now they need to decide which side they want to issue on. Ideally, there would be like one, especially with like these stellar assets that we expect to be the majority. We want to have like a very straightforward best practice. And I think we might be just confusing the issuers with adding that functionality on the smart contract.
I also think we're asking the issuer to make a decision really on versus between scale and flexibility. So if we want to be able to, if we want, like what David said, an issuer wants an asset to be used on things like SpeedX or on cheap payment operations, they're going to be tempted to go that scale route. But then that might be conflicting with flexibility. Like if they want to have, I don't know, some sort of SEP8 like functionality that's on chain that maybe says you can use my asset if you have already been authorized to use some other asset. As sort of like a KYC interface or something like that. Like if they want to add something like that later on, or I don't know, like they have to decide at the point of issuing, am I going to be a smart asset or an asset that can scale?
Maybe that, well, I'd have to think about whether there's a workaround for that. There might be one. I'm not really sure. So I don't know. I'd have to think about that more to answer what I think.
Just to clarify, because I was going to ask this question, I think you just answered it with that, Lee. Like, I'm an issuer and there's a choice. I can choose to issue on Classic or I can choose to issue on Smart. Advantage for issuing on Classic is that it has better scalability.
Maybe.
True? Maybe. I'm just thinking, like, if new issuers come to the network,
the other advantages
I
are
would choose to issue on Classic.
Sorry, can you say that one more time, Justin? I couldn't hear the whole thing.
Oh, well, basically, when new issuers join the network, why would they choose to issue on Classic?
Well, presumably the idea of Classic, right, is that your asset is very well defined, right? There's just like 4 bits or whatever that like tell everybody exactly what to expect of your asset. And so that lets the fact that it's such a well-known quantity also lets it be like allows us to implement things more scalably, and lets sort of guarantee like things like auth immutable, right? Like guarantee that there won't be weird surprises.
I think the big thing is that Classic will be cheaper and have more capacity. That's the main reason to do that on Classic.
But like, for example, do we expect exchanges to offer both classic and smart assets, or just classic assets? Like, well, you know, when you're getting USDC or whatever, will it be a smart USDC, or will it just be like classic USDC?
It'll be Classic. Everything that exchanges do, exchanges move slow. They move very slow, and they're very resistant to introducing changes. So
if you ever hope
and-
for your
and-
asset to be listed on, you know, Kraken or wherever, like, you'll want to make it classic.
That's a good point. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Generally speaking, I think that except for like extreme use cases for with smart contracts that have sophisticated non-trivial logic, I definitely think we need to push everyone to issue on Classic and use this whatever interoperability scheme we decide on.
Then I think it becomes pretty important to make it as easy as possible to do this. Like those mint and burn operations I was talking about, they sound important now because like if we want people to get like a unified smart user experience, but still have an underlying classic asset that you can like actually unwrap, that would be the easiest way to get that. So we probably should do that.
We're about to make Horizon's life a bit hellish with like figuring out these things and how to convey them to the wallets.
Wait, but isn't the whole point of, if you issue your asset as a classic asset, then Horizon should just work, right? That's another
Yes.
advantage.
Yeah, but the question is like, if a user wants to do something on the smart side, you know, let's say I did something on the smart side, and now I have like part of my USDC balance is on Classic, part of my USDC thing is on Jump Cannon. Now Horizon needs to give wallets some like unified view. But then
Why should Horizon even touch the smart side of things?
I agree.
George, can you expand on why you agree?
I would also love to hear more. I was also like,
It just doesn't seem like Horizon's place to make those kinds of, to coalesce those separate things. Like, if you're making them separate, then they should stay separate, because we just give an accurate reflection of the core's state of the world. And so if you have them in two places, then we reflect them in two places, right?
Well, a wallet uses Horizon as its kind of like, just data access layer into the Stellar universe, right? Now, if a wallet,
Classic wallet.
Well, no, a wallet, not just a classic wallet. Like
We don't have any smart wallets, but I would imagine smart wallets maybe wouldn't like Horizon.
Stellar wallets would want to add smart functionality, right? It's not going to be like two universes. That's the whole thing, right? You know, if I have a Stellar wallet and I want to be able to participate in a DeFi application, I need to have access to all this information. And we need to find a way to present that information.
You're going to need a level of extensibility that Horizon just like it's just not the Horizon way of doing things. Like maybe I have some asset and then it like keeps its own ledger in like some weird, compressed state or something, right? So like there's actually going to need to be like kind of server side logic for decoding that, right? And that's not, we don't want to be like loading that stuff into Horizon, right? We want Horizon to be like stable and predictable.
Let me rephrase. Maybe Horizon is a bit of a loaded term, but we need to provide a data access layer to Stellar that allows wallets to reason about what's going on the smart side, what's going on the dumb side, sorry, classic side, and to interoperate with these like wrap on wrap functions. So this might not be Horizon. This might be, Horizon NG or whatever. But something needs to provide that functionality, and that something is, like we're making its life a bit difficult.
Well, I mean, I would argue that something is going to need to be much more sort of modular and extensible than Horizon, right? It's just going to be a totally different architecture. And in fact, you might have many instances of this, and you would have some Horizon NGs that support some assets but not other assets, right? And I mean, it would just be, it's just going to be a much more heterogeneous ecosystem, right? Assuming that people are taking advantage of the smart contracts.
Chalmer, can I try to get some clarity on what you're actually saying here? Are you saying that you want this thing? I'm going to use the word Horizon, and we're all just going to pretend we're talking about the same thing, even though we're not. But you want Horizon, this data access layer, to be able to talk about both the wrapped balances and the unwrapped classic balances, like the trustline balances, or are you saying that you want it to be more generically useful for exploring the state of the smart contract universe outside of these asset adapter wrapper things? I think you're saying the first one, but I think David thinks you're saying the second one, and maybe you're not saying either of them.
Stuff right now. Like I'm trying to think of. By the way, can you guys hear me?
I don't know how long you were talking, but I wasn't able to hear you for a while at least.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm talking about the wrapped assets, specifically like this kind of like dance between wrapped assets and regular assets. And I'm thinking about if I'm trying to just like top down design from a user perspective, like the wallet experience. Wallet experience to be very to have like this universal view in which a user doesn't have to think about which side an asset is on, right? So either the wallet needs to have these like multiple services that it interacts with, or it needs to have like this unified service that it interacts with that provides it with like a unified view of the world. So I think that regardless, this is something that needs to happen, and it doesn't necessarily actually, yeah, I think Cap 48 might be more friendly for downstream systems.
So I mean, maybe the problem here is that I didn't read these caps because I didn't hear about them in time. So to the extent that I guess that there's a choice between explicitly wrapping and unwrapping versus like always having assets be sort of both classic and smart at the same time, I would strongly favor the unified one. But again, I haven't read the rationales and stuff. Assuming that we do that, right, then we're going to have sort of classic assets, which are also accessible in smart contracts, and then we're going to have like smart contract only assets. So for the classic assets, Horizon should be sufficient, right, because you can access those through the classic interface. For the new smart assets, every asset is going to need its own Horizon modification potentially, or like a lot of assets are if they're doing interesting things. And so we're going to need a kind of modularity on the server side where like I might issue a new kind of asset with like new properties. I'm going to need to like also present kind of like Horizon side logic to do that. And to me it feels like Horizon doesn't feel like it has the kind of modularity and extensibility that we would want for that. We should think about a more like plugin friendly architecture.
There's another angle to this too, and that is that Horizon, like right now, mostly Horizon just provides access to data, and if we just make sure that if we make it such that Horizon has access to contract data, technically clients could still use that contract data to display things like the balances or whatever. They can look up in the contract data the same way the contract does. There's some downsides to doing that, but that's one way for us to sort of, I guess, kick that can down the road a little bit. There can potentially be services that show some specific balance format for specific types of assets. It doesn't have to be Horizon though. Clients could just use Horizon to get like the raw contract data. Actually, I think that's sort of like the model that of the first demo that Paul had posted into the Jump Cannon channel. He posted a demo where you could use this Horizon-like service to just get the raw contract data, and then the client can interpret it however it wants. John, is the main difference in terms of the interface between CAP 48 and CAP 49, like ignoring the wrapped asset part, but the other main difference just being supporting having that total supply?
That's the other interface difference. And then there's a couple other like ambiguity improvements. Like it's very clear what the answer of balance of is in all cases, even outside of just the issuer case in CAP 49. Like, is the balance the available balance or the raw balance? This is one of the things that I like kept coming back to when I was writing CAP 48. And I don't think I was consistent everywhere. But in CAP 49, like there is no notion of the available balance from the contract's perspective. It's just the balance. So like there's like some interface improvements in that like you get the total supply in CAP 49 that you don't get in 48. But like the interface is also just more logical in CAP 49. Like there's only one right answer basically in CAP 49 for every function. It just does the thing that you expect it to do. There's no other thing that it could possibly do.
Do we have to keep to the ERC20 interface exactly though? Like I could see it being, if we could solve the other problems. So if we found a solution to total supply for CAP 48, we could say, okay, there's actually two balance functions. There's, the balance of and available balance of in the Stellar ecosystem. Is that fair?
I mean, we definitely could do that. And then we could basically say like, hey, like, when you implement a token on Stellar, what you should do is implement both of these functions, and probably you want them to be the same function. They just have the same implementation. We definitely could go and do everything in reverse. So
yeah, so
you guys hear me or?
A little bit.
It sucks. Okay, maybe I need to shout or something. Is it okay or?
Yeah, it's good enough.
Okay. No, I was going to say like the reason we have this on the classic side is because of liabilities, right? And actually liabilities, we could have implemented that differently. Like in Smart, the way you would do it is actually you would move the actual liquidity outside of the account, right? So I think like an offer basically would be, you would actually move whatever you want to sell in the offer. Like that's not the way we did it, whatever. But that's why, to me, I don't know if we need to expose those two concepts like balance-wise. Like the available, the usable balance is the thing you want to expose. Like the fact that whatever is locked in offer. This is not interesting. I think from a smart contract point of view, it's not usable. Like it's not available, right?
The main downside of that, though, is like things that should be true cease to be true. Like you should expect that the total supply is equal to the sum of all the balances. That just won't be true.
This feels like a minor detail to me, like the distinction about how we would expose these two values, because we could just choose one or we could just expose both. And doing either doesn't really break. I don't think doing either would break a contract's ability to replicate what's happening on other chains. Is that not true?
I don't know if it's true, but like if your goal is to make it so that these tokens interoperate perfectly with what people are accustomed to using, which is my goal here, like if I could, I would just like take the stuff that people have been building on for 5 years and just like build exactly that stuff on Stellar. because that's how we're going to get the fastest adoption. And any place where it's not exactly obvious how it works exactly the same, that's friction that's going to slow adoption. And if it doesn't work exactly the same, then it's really going to slow adoption. So like the first step is like, is it obvious that it works exactly the same? If the answer is no, you probably have a problem. And then if it doesn't work exactly the same, you have a second problem. So that's how I feel about this. It's like anything we can do to make those answers like, this is so obvious that you don't need to think about it, and it does exactly what you're used to, that should be our goal. I don't know if people disagree with that goal, but I think it's a really good goal. Like my goal would be to make this so stupidly easy for people to use because they're so familiar with it that they want to build right now, immediately, you know?
I mean, unless there are things about the way that systems currently work that people hate.
There are, and that EIP 2612 thing that I mentioned was something that Tomer pointed out that some people found a big improvement about something that people hate from ERC20. So like, it can be better. But all of these things work better than classic Stellar assets, I think, at least for like the needs of smart contracts.
So, I mean, I guess we have about 12 minutes left in this meeting. Do we want to keep, like, I know that there's a few other sort of questions that came up outside of the interoperability questions. Do we want to take this time to discuss those, or should we stick with interoperability? There's contract management questions that I know there's Cap 47 talks about, for instance. Stuff that we want to cover
I would say
related
Cap
to that.
48 and Cap, especially because Cap 49 just came out. I think we need some time to
we
to learn
can
it,
if we think we're done
and
with
go over the details.
the Cap 48, Cap 49 discussion for now.
I feel like there's a lot to think about and discuss. It does feel like we got to a natural lull. Do you want to talk about the cap that you've been working on?
Yeah, I can start with Cap 47. So Cap 47 just specifies how contract management would work. So creating, update, and removing contracts. So it's relatively simple compared to Cap 46 and 48, 49. Lee had some questions related to this. I think the most interesting one was we allow mutable contracts, and the cap doesn't specify any versioning right now. So one of his questions was that if you allow mutable contracts, how would you identify which contract version was used for a specific invocation? Currently, there's nothing in there that you would have to replay history and go look at which contract entry was used at a specific invocation. So Lee's question was around auditing which contract was used. I'm not sure if this is something we should add. Lee, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, you basically said it. Like, I think there's two components to it: identification and then referencing. There should be some way, I think, for someone to speak concretely about a specific version of a contract. Like you should be able to, there are going to be APIs that expose information about this is the transaction that executed, this is what it executed on. It makes a lot of sense, I think, for those APIs to be able to point exactly to the exact code. And maybe that's just a hash of the code. And if so, that's great. We just need to include that in the cap. Maybe it doesn't even need to be stored on the ledger. I'm not sure if that's important. It could just be a hash that's not actually stored, and you have to calculate it if you want to calculate it. There just needs to be, yeah. And I guess in terms of storing it in the ledger, like the question I had was like, do we need to install that in the transaction results or meta or something like that, so that there is something more concrete, or do you just have to know this transaction executed on ledger 5, and if you go and look at ledger 5 at the state of the ledger, you can see that this is the contract that was there. Yeah, and like if we have to do that, that just feels a bit ambiguous.
Okay.
But I think Nico may have mentioned something around, there's a cost obviously to storing 32-byte hashes for everything. And so maybe this is actually not realistic to store like that everywhere a contract gets used or something. So Nico, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Nico seems to be having on and off issues connecting to this
Yeah,
new experiment.
so am I. Can you
space we
guys
call
hear me?
Discord.
I can hear you right now, Tomer. You have been cutting in and out a bit though from time to time.
Yeah. Is this something that downstream systems can do? You know, when they index changes, they can also index what version of the contract caused these changes.
I think so, or at least maybe. George might be able to shed some light on this. I think one thing, we have had some issues with like backfilling some of this data in the past. So I think one example would be, claimable balances don't track who created them. And it would actually seem simple for us to say, oh yeah, downstream systems should be able to just figure that out. But it was actually really challenging. I'm actually not sure if we actually found a solution for that. Maybe this can be an ask to the Horizon team, who are sort of experts in this field.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty hard to say right now, especially for me. I mostly joined as a listener, so I'm not super familiar with how these caps are suggested to be implemented right now. But I do know that like we have the key value data access model that Paul is working on, which provides access, I guess, to contracts, but maybe not so much how those contracts have been interacted with. So that's definitely TBD from the Horizon side.
I will say that I felt a little bad in retrospect about the not putting who created a claimable balance on it. Earlier drafts of the proposal had that feature, and we convinced ourselves that it was a waste to do it, which was basically just saying like, "Yo, Horizon, y'all figure it out," which like maybe wasn't super nice in retrospect, but I understand why we did it at the time, and I don't know if I would have, like, even knowing what I know now, I'm not sure we would have done something differently for that particular case. But there definitely is some like potential risk for like caveat emptor in the future. Like, I could imagine people wanting to know exactly what happened, even on chain. Like, hey, like this contract had a bug in it. Like, let me write a contract that goes and identifies all the bugged out data. Like, I could imagine doing that. Or maybe you do it off chain. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I don't think we should just assume that the only obvious thing is to push the problem downstream.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And specifically because in this case, the identifier or the reference, whatever you want to call it, could be derived from the data itself. So I think like the claimable balance creator example is more challenging because it wasn't actually derivable from the immediate data from the claimable balance itself. Whereas in this case, it is. Like if you have the WASM code, you could hash it. And if we say the ID is the hash, then it might not be that bad.
one thing I was talking to, slightly different topic, but still related to like code versioning stuff, that I was talking to Siddharth about yesterday afternoon, was about like maybe the state of like, and like Siddharth had some reasons that this was like maybe not a brilliant idea, and I don't claim it is, but like basically like the idea that I kind of had, which was weird, was that all contract code is mutable. There are no immutability flags or anything for it, but it's only mutable from within that own smart contract. So basically, if you want to be able to redeploy your smart contract, you need to write a function that can redeploy your smart contract. If it is missing, your contract is immutable. If it is there, then you can redeploy your smart contract using whatever scheme you want for signatures and stuff. So the main advantage I see to this is like, you get immutability for free, and you get mutability for free. But if you want mutability, you just have to build whatever mutability scheme you want. But the catch that Siddharth pointed out that made me think that maybe this is not so smart is he said that if you accidentally bork your contract and forget to deploy your redeploy function, you're dead. You're just straight dead. So yeah, that's your risk basically.
Yeah, I think we included with the idea that maybe it might be a good idea to allow both. You know, you can update the contract with update manage that, or yeah, update contract op, or you know, you can allow the contract code itself to upgrade the contract. And we'd obviously have to think about this a bit more, but that might be a good idea.
If you deploy your contract, when is the new contract available? Like the current ledger? No, it'd probably be the next ledger, right?
Yeah, it'd be the next ledger. It would, I guess the operation would basically be like, hey, at the end of this ledger, write the new code. Kind of like the same thing as like when we were working on SpeedX. It's like a SpeedX create offer operation means like, hey, when you go into the SpeedX phase, make this offer and try to trade it. So
there's some interesting applications of that. You know, you could write a contract that actually contains multiple versions of itself, and it could change which version of itself is currently going to be deployed based off some other inputs. Yeah, it's intriguing.
It's funny you say that because I was thinking about things like that too. I was thinking about deploying a Quine that can write itself back to the chain, which I thought was just like intriguingly weird. But there's some examples of like Quines that can write themselves back even under this case of corruption. So like you could imagine a contract that could have its data corrupted and then write itself back to the contract anyway, which is pretty neat. I have no idea how that could possibly be useful, but like there probably are useful versions of these kinds of machinery.
It feels like a good thought to end on, especially since we're out of time. So we are going to be having these meetings weekly. I don't know if we're having one. Well, we'll sort of deal with scheduling in the background. But so for anyone who's watching, you can find them in this channel. We're also going to be discussing this stuff asynchronously in the Jump Cannon and Jump Cannon dev channels here on Discord. Thanks, everybody. I will talk to you all soon.